Let's discuss the legalities of surveillance. In this video, I will cover the do's and don'ts of surveillance to ensure you stay legal. Now, just to be clear, I am not an attorney, nor do I play one on TV or YouTube for that matter, and this video, nor any of my videos, should ever be taken as legal advice. The first do is to establish a lawful basis for your surveillance. In other words, you need to ensure that your reason for doing surveillance is based on applicable laws and regulations in your area. One legal purpose for conducting surveillance would be for reasons such as the prevention of fraud, like when we go out and do surveillance on, let's say, a workers' comp claim. We are not necessarily doing surveillance to prove fraud is happening. Rather, we are conducting surveillance to gather evidence to establish whether it may or may not be occurring. And in many cases, we do not have any clear evidence either way. And you know what? That is fine, because we are just finders of the fact. We gather the evidence as it presents itself and then report on our findings and observations to our client, and it is up to them to decide what the next course of action is. Another example of a legal purpose is to help investigate potential employee theft at a business. I have done surveillance many times, sitting and watching from a distance inside a retail store at the cash registers, or watching the alley to see if employees are taking merchandise out to pick up later, or even to give them to friends or family that meet them behind the store. One time I caught the entire night shift of a retail store literally loading up the back end of a pickup truck with groceries, electronics, household goods, clothing, you name it. And this included the night manager and assistant manager. Needless to say, all of them had their day in court and had their futures freed up to look for other gainful employment. And we have had many surveillance jobs that entailed the protection of property, sitting overnight, watching for vandalism and theft, or in some cases to be a deterrent to vandalism or theft. And if you would like to ensure that you and your PI business are protected properly, then check out this video's sponsor. This video is sponsored by OREP Insurance and Working PI Magazine. OREP is a leading provider of private investigator liability insurance. Visit orep.org for a quote today. You also want to ensure that your surveillance complies with relevant laws regarding conducting surveillance in your area. You must familiarize yourself and strictly adhere to local, state, and federal laws concerning surveillance. But not just while doing surveillance. You need to know and adhere to the laws as they pertain to data collection and data protection, as well as privacy regulations. And when it comes to data collection, you should limit your data collection to obtaining data necessary for the stated purpose of surveillance and avoiding gathering excessive or irrelevant information. This is important to make sure you do not appear to be some cyber stalker if all that irrelevant information you gathered gets released to the other side in court. It is also important to ensure you don't go broke gathering too much data with paid databases. You have to remember that every click costs you money, so be careful how deep you go down those rabbit holes. Make sure you have proper procedures in place to protect the data you collected too. You need to have appropriate security measures in place to safeguard the collected data, such as encryption, secured storage, and other access controls. And make sure you and any investigators that are working for you are trained and well-versed in conducting surveillance legally. This includes training that ensures they follow all applicable laws and ethical practices, and they always consider privacy considerations. Those privacy considerations are a big one many investigators don't know about or don't always abide by. And even if they don't know the laws regarding a person's right to privacy or reasonable expectations of privacy, well, guess what? Ignorance is not a defense. They should have known, so make sure they get the training they need. For instance, you can only shoot video of activities that are in plain public view. That means you cannot shoot video over a fence, and in most states you cannot shoot video through a residential window, even if it is in plain sight to the public. In those cases, you can document what you see in your written report, but you can't shoot video of it. I had a case not too long ago where I could very plainly see my subject inside a residence through the front bay window at the house, but I couldn't get video or photos for that matter due to privacy concerns and other laws. What I did do, though, was I put everything I saw in detail in my report, and that was more than sufficient enough for the client to work out a deal on the case. You see, even when we do get video, it is only as good as your ability to document in your report what is in the video and what you can testify to in court or another hearing. And as a professional private investigator, your testimony does weigh heavily in court, especially if you are always working on an ethical and legal basis. That is why you need to ensure that you and any private investigators working for you get ample training on all these subjects. Another thing to help make sure you do surveillance legally is to review and update your company policies and procedures regularly. You do have policies and procedures for your company, right? I know at first glance that may not seem to be about surveillance, but it really is. You need to have policies and procedures in place that you follow that help you ensure you are doing surveillance legally and ethically. And you need to periodically check those policies and procedures to ensure they're up to date and conform to the best practices at that time. And you need to make sure your employees, payroll employees or 1099 subcontractors, have copies of those policies and procedures and that they adhere to them as well. Now let's get into the don'ts when conducting surveillance legally. To start, don't record audio without permission. Now this is going to be different from state to state, but many states, such as Colorado, where I am, are one-party states, meaning one party in the conversation must be aware that the conversation is being recorded. So if I follow someone into a restaurant where they meet with their secret partner and I start getting video of them and my video also captures audio and their conversations, well, I am not a party to that conversation, so I have just broken the law. This is why I usually have audio turned off on my covert cameras to ensure I do not break that law. Another big don't is don't share any data collected or any of the case details with anyone who is not authorized or legally allowed to see that data. This is another hard one for a lot of new PIs out there, and yes, I know some veteran PIs that have a difficult time with this also. It is so tempting to tell your buddies over a beer about your latest big case and all the juicy details you found out about your subject. You have to keep client confidentiality in mind at all times as well. Protect yourself from claims of slander or libel if someone's private information gets out there in public due to you discussing the case with someone who had no legal right to know about it. Going back to your policies, you should have one that ensures no one, including yourself, talks about any recent or current cases with anyone, not on a need-to-know basis. And even if it is an older case, those policies must speak to the fact that you will never disclose any identifiable information about anyone involved in any of those investigations. And don't conduct surveillance if you are not licensed where licensing is required. This would seem like a real no-brainer, but I do know it happens. If you are required to have a PI license and are unlicensed for any reason, your entire investigation is, in essence, illegal and of zero legal value. In fact, not only are you taking legal risks yourself, you are also placing your client at risk on many different levels. If your evidence is introduced into court and then it is discovered that you are not licensed, your entire investigation will get thrown out of court and your client now has no evidence to continue, or all the rest of your client's evidence will be questioned and you will be facing some serious legal consequences up to and including jail time. I have seen cases where the other side knew the PI wasn't licensed or didn't do something right, and they let the evidence be introduced. And they do that so they can then cross-examine the PI, get him to say he did have a license when he didn't, or did something a certain way when in fact he did it a different way, and then they have him impeached on the stand. And once a PI has been impeached in one court, well, they won't be able to take the stand in any other court for the most part, because the other side will always be looking into their credibility and doing a background to try to uncover those things. And I know I always talk about the need for you to have PI insurance, and while you may or may not be required to, depending on your PI license status, you do need to make sure you have proper insurance for your surveillance vehicle. As well, make sure your registration is up to date and any state safety inspections are up to date as well. Now, what do you do if the police roll up on you while doing surveillance? Well, I made this video that covers that very topic, so check it out now.